So welcome everyone to our second webinar to talk about Active Hope, the book. And we are joined by co-author Chris Johnstone. And my name's Claudia, and this is Kate.
I'm Kate.
And we both work for Friends of the Earth, and we're running a book club. And this month we've been reading Active Hope, which is a great book. And it's really, really important, and it's a great resource for, as it says on the tin, how to face this mess without going crazy.
And we are going a little bit crazy today because it's really hot and we're a bit tired. But it is a fantastic book to read, and I don't know how many on the call will have read it, but it is really about how to face the mess without going crazy. And I was kind of feeling that I needed to figure out how to do this because it's been something that's been on my mind for a long time, and I think I'm going crazy sometimes. So it's nice to know that I'm not alone, and it's good to start to think about ways to actually proactively deal with that, and then take positive steps to really take action to try and change things or to feel better about it. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So what's going to happen for the next hour is we're going to hand over to Chris in a few minutes, and he's going to talk about his resource to allow us to read the book as part of a collective, and the reasons why that's really important and a useful practice. And we're also going to be joined by a few people who have formed reading groups and their experience. And if you think of any questions or comments at all throughout the next 20 minutes, you can type them in the chat window and we can come back to the questions later.
So our focus is really around how to run an Active Hope book group. And I want to say a bit about Active Hope, the book, what our hopes were, Joanna, Macy and I, when we wrote it a while ago now. It was about 10 years ago that we were writing it, and it came out just at the start of 2012. It's like 7 years ago, and such a lot has happened in that last 7 years that Joanna and I are currently working, we just started working on doing a second edition of the book to bring it up to date. But the core practices that are in there are still just as needed now, even more needed now than they were there. And we had one central question really, which is, when we're facing our concerns about the world, what helps us give our best response? And that's that core question, what helps us. Let's start the recording. The core question that Joanna and I had that started out us writing this book was, when facing our concerns about the world, what helps us give our best response? And for decades, Joanna, Macy had been running workshops really around that, really around helping us be present to what's going on and give our best response based on a set of practices called the work that reconnects. And that involved a journey round this spiral of 4 stations, beginning with gratitude, honoring our pain for the world, seeing with new eyes, and then going forth. And the idea is that each time you go round this journey, round this spiral, it nourishes not just your capacity to make a difference, but also your desire, your intention to make a difference. And what we wanted to do with the book, we wanted the book to take people around the same kind of journey that we would guide people around if we were running a workshop. And I've worked with Joanna since the late 1980s. I was part of the small group in Britain running these kind of workshops, getting involved in around the mid 1980s, and then working with Joanna in the late 1980s. And So both of us have been running these groups for a long time. When we wanted to draw out, like, what are the key insights and key practices that if we presented them together in a book, it would take somebody on a journey a bit similar to being in a workshop. But once the book came out, we started running groups based on people reading the book together. Now, I live in the far north of Scotland. There's not so many people around where I live, and so I very interested in working online, and I started running online Active Hope groups with a friend of mine, Barbara, who I've never actually met physically, but it was through the magic window of Skype it was that we're using, but it's the magic window of Zoom is very similar. We started guiding groups around this, and then we also set up a resource to support other people to run Active Hope groups too. And so what we want to do in this session is really look at what's involved in going round this journey of this spiral, guided by the group, guided by the book, thinking of the book as a co-facilitator. So and what we also felt there is that we know that some people have trained as facilitators in this empowering, inspiring, transformative approach to the work that reconnects, but also found the idea of running in-depth workshops a bit intimidating, and the idea of gathering as a group round a book felt an easier first step. And I know that I've interviewed a number of people who've run these groups around the world in different countries in the world, and that's something a lot of them have said, that they found this an easier first step into facilitating this work. I'll say a bit more about this work. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to set up a resource that would support you to, or anyone interested in running groups. And if you go to the website activehope.info, there's a link there to the Active Hope group resource, the resource for Active Hope groups. And on that, it's on an online platform, learning platform called Rizuku. There's a 6-session guide, really. That was the model we worked on. We worked with just having 6 sessions where each session looked at a different part of the book. But I've also talked with people who've run it a group a month over a year. Some people have done it over a smaller number of sessions. That it's more that part of the book journey, and I think of it as a book journey. It's a book journey where not just like a book club where you read a book, but it's where you do the book. You do the book. And I say, what do I mean by do the book? The book is a guide to a transformative journey. And when you do that journey together, guided by the book, that's really the purpose of an Active Hope book group journey. And so I've got on this online resource just information and session plans and links that help people do that. So that just go to activehope.info for information about that. So I want to say a bit more about what's the purpose of this group. And I'm just going to move this picture here. Right at the beginning, I find it very helpful to begin with a purpose statement. You know, a purpose statement is we are here to. So, for example, in this webinar, we are here to look at how to set up Active Hope book groups, where you go on this journey of the work that reconnects around this spiral, guided by the book or using the book as a co-facilitator in that. And part of it in terms of, so that's our purpose here now, but the purpose of a book group is to read the book at a different level. I know some people have read the book a number of times. Each time they've read it, they've discovered more in it. And for me, each time I run an Active Hope book group, and I've run a number online over the years, each time I go through it, it's like I discover things, or I hear something that someone else has seen in it, and it's like, oh, I hadn't seen it that way. That's really helpful, that we chew over the book together, the content of the book, the insights and the practices in the book. And the idea here is to support our engagement in Active Hope, the practice. So this term Active Hope, on one level, it's the name of a book, but also Active Hope refers to something we do. It's a practice of being active in support of our hopes, and we think of it as a 3-stage process of starting from where you are, having your eyes open, being present to how that is, and including your reactions to how that is, but then from any starting point, identifying your hoped for direction from there, and then being active in moving that way. So that's the active hope process. And it's really about contributing to positive change. And what we're doing with the journey is that we're going on that journey together in a way where we're not just ingesting the book, we're also digesting the book, digesting the intention. It's there to nourish our capacity, intention, and enthusiasm to make a difference in the world. Mention exercises in frustration tolerance, just doing anything online. Sometimes you get misbehavior of the internet, you get some problems that come up, and I think if we see frustration tolerance as a strength that we can train ourselves in, it's a really great strength for engaging in positive change, because there's so much out there that is frustrating. And then in terms of the purpose of the group, the idea is that it supports each of us to give our gift of active hope. Our gift of active hope, I think of it as our contribution to the process of change. And I've loved this image of each of us holding our like a sapling or a small plant that we can, that's our contribution, something that we can do. And so our gift of active hope is something that we offer. It's our contribution to a larger story of change, our way of playing our part. But it's through offering our gift of active hope that we also receive in so many ways that our lives become more meaningful and satisfying. So that's part of that group purpose of the group too. And it's through offering our gift of active hope that we take part in a larger shift. We refer to this larger shift as the Great Turning. The Great Turning is a larger story of change, and it's a shift of moving away from what we call the story of business as usual, carrying on the way we usually do, with its heavy use of fossil fuels and a mass extinction event that's happening in our times, to really recognizing that each of us can play a role in a larger collective process of recovery in our world, how we can act to support the flourishing of life, even if it's only the small bits of life around us, that each of us has a ripple effect that extends out to the world. And it's about being more conscious of what our ripples are and looking at how we can have positive ripples out to the world. That's our gift of active hope. And I love this question: what happens through me? What happens through me? Or you can do it as a beginning of a sentence. We use a lot of these sentence starters as a way of working. What happens through me is, and the purpose of the book is what happens through us, not just things like kindness and determination and creativity, but also the process of active hope and the larger story of this great turning, this shift towards a life-sustaining society, culture, way of being. And that great turning, it might be out there, but it's also in here. It's in our hearts, it's in our conviction, it's in our loyalty, it's in our core operating principle for our life. There's a turning towards life, towards being part of life, seeing ourselves as part of life, and expressing our commitment to support the flourishing and well-being of life at a time where that is under attack. So that's the kind of larger process of this work. When we talk about this work, the work of active hope, the work that reconnects, which is a set of insights and practices that supports our active hope. So in terms of how we do this, this is a 6-session plan that I've worked with a number of times, and I know some other people around the world, they've just taken the session plans that we've got in the online resource and used them very effectively. And we've started just by talking about the introduction and first couple of chapters, which is very much setting the scene, telling this 3 stories of our time: the business as usual, the great unraveling, and this idea of the great turning, that there's a larger story of change that can happen through us. And then that sets the scene But then each week after that, and I've often done these groups weekly, but sometimes fortnightly, and I know some people have done them monthly, each of the next sessions looks at a different part of this spiral. So beginning with the gratitude, because it resources us, it puts us in a stronger position to face what's there, but it also nourishes us, and it nourishes our desire to give back. One of the things research on gratitude is very clear that when people have higher levels of gratitude, they tend to have more pro-social and pro-environmental behavior. They tend to have an increased desire to give back to the larger communities that we're part of. The honoring our pain for the world, very much because when the pain is seen as too difficult to look at, people just turn away. People turn away, say, I can't face the mess of the world. I can't face what's happening in the world. And it becomes one of the ways that active hope gets blocked. Our constructive response to the mess we're in gets blocked when people say, it's too painful, I don't want to look. And I remember one person on a course, he said, I want to learn to walk with what feels true. I want to walk with truth, in my life. I want to live a life that feels true. But sometimes the truth is painful. And so I need to learn to be able to walk with my pain. And so one way, what we do is we look at practices that help us be with the distress, the pain for the world, the uncomfortable feelings that can come up when we really give our attention to the tragedy that's unfolding on planet Earth in this period of time, the mass extinction of the species, the hundreds of millions of people starving, the very great inequalities, there's so many, the concern about the a likelihood of a major societal collapse. There's so many aspects of what we call the great unraveling, the kind of falling apart of our world that are so disturbing, that can bring up grief and anger and guilt and numbness, this range of different experiences. And just being with how we feel, love this phrase, we feel how we feel, but also we can hold each other in community and practices. We can look at what makes it more bearable to keep our eyes open in these times. And so these first two parts of the spiral, gratitude and honoring our pain, are very much about being with what's there. But then we look at how we nourish our response, particularly the seeing with new eyes, opening to a wider range of resources. And we talk about these 4 discoveries in chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8. 4 discoveries of when we look in a different way, we see ourselves a different way. We see our sense of power, our ability to make a difference in the world in a different way. We open to a richer experience of community and to a larger sense of time. And it's this widening of perspective, seeing with new eyes, it can change our sense of what's possible. So that rather than feeling like, a sense of defeat, of like, there's too much there, I can't do anything about it, we can open to an expanded sense of possibility, really drawing also a lot on the new science, but also wisdom traditions from around the world. And then the last part going forth is really looking at, well, what's our part in this? And we do that going forth in two episodes, really. First, looking at about catching and inspiring vision and daring to believe it's possible, but then also building support around us, maintaining our energy and being strengthened by uncertainty. So that's the kind of the book journey. And in terms of what the book group journey involves, there's a series of meetings. Sometimes it might be online, sometimes it might be in place. And in some ways, if the book is an excuse for people to gather and share their concerns about what's happening and talk about how we can support each other in giving our response, our best response, that itself is a really great outcome. And when Joanna and I wrote this book, one of our hopes was that this would be something that would draw people together, that if we can come together and share our concerns, talk about our concerns rather than feel like they're too depressing to mention to anyone, but also support each other in finding our part in the larger process of change. The book is really just an excuse to help that kind of conversation happen, but it also offers practices that kind of guide us through a structured process that's a transformative, strengthening journey, and just like a workshop would be. It helps a lot to have someone playing the role of facilitator. What I mean by facilitator is someone who keeps an eye on what's happening in this group, someone who thinks beforehand what's going to help this group run well, who sets things up. And it doesn't have to be one person. Quite often it's really helps if there's someone else. I really like working with other people, and I love this phrase, 1 + 1 = 2 and a bit, that when you've got a good double act, people working together, you create something more. But I think also it takes a bit of practice to work well with someone else. I think that co-facilitation is something that needs conscious development as well. But in terms of, I know people who hadn't worked together and they just said, in a conversation, let's form a group around this book. And there are people who hadn't done any facilitation training, were new to it, and they'd set up a group and it worked so well that they wanted to do it again, and then they wanted to do it again, and now they've been doing these groups every year for the last 5 years. So it helps have somebody as a facilitator, and it might be 1 or 2 people say, we're going to take this on between us. But it might also be that people take it in turns, that you have a peer basis, you decide who's going to facilitate each meeting, and you decide that in advance. And I know some people have just read this book with just 1 or 2 other people. There might be members of the same family, just say, well, I'm going to read it with my sister, and there's also another friend who's going to join us as well. I think it helps to have a few more people so that if one person can't make it, it doesn't feel like a huge proportion of the group isn't there. I think it helps have a kind of critical mass, but certainly even if it was just you only reading this book with 1 other person, it changes it from a solo journey to a collaborative journey. And there's something about the generative space between people. When people are sharing a journey together, we are strengthened by each other. It's found, I'm a great fan of Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and stories like that. And those storylines go in the beginning, people facing the most awful, scary threat that seems totally overwhelming and beyond their power to adequately address. But what makes the story is rising to the occasion and forming a merry gang who face this together. And if reading Active Hope together is a way of forming a merry gang, saying, look, here we are facing this appalling mess in our world. We want to play our part. We don't know what that will lead to. There's no guarantee of success, but at the same time, we're more likely to move towards the future we hope for if we're active in that process than if we're not. And that process is helped by good company. And so if the book helps you attract people around you who are engaged in this journey together, and you might, after reading Active Hope as a group, you might decide there's other books you want to read or other practices you want to engage in that support your journey. I've been part of an action study action group on the work that reconnects. We met monthly for a year and a half, but I was also part of a practice group around the work that reconnects, and that we met over 2 or 3 years. I was part of an eco-psychology group that met over 6 or 7 years, and I'm still in touch with people in that group now, even 15 years later, that there's such great power in being part of a group you feel at home in. And it might take a while to feel at home in a group, but when you do, it becomes your home group. It becomes a source of nourishment for you. And so if an Active Hope book journey can start off that kind of book, that home group formation. That's a really, really great thing. So one of the hopes of this webinar is, I love this image of the dandelion. Thank you to Dory Midnight, artist, who did this lovely image of the dandelion. But this idea of the grandfather clock, all these seeds, and you kind of blow and they land somewhere and grow into new plants. I wonder, you know, what might emerge just from this conversation here today, that there's a number of us coming together, talking about forming active hope book groups, or there might be another book that really draws you, think, let's form a group of people around sharing the journey of reading this book, but particularly if a book has guided practices in it, and many books do, then that's something you can share in together. So that's me talking a bit about that, and I'm wondering if you've got questions. So shall I stop screen share, and then I can have a look at the chat window, and I can write in the chat window. And if any of you got questions as well, you can either write in the chat window or put up your hand. Love to hear. I've just been talking a bit about Active Hope book groups, but it was pretty much what do they call, broad brushstrokes. So a lot of detail was missed out. I'm wondering how that landed, what questions it's left you with, or any comments you'd like to make. That's a seagull with its comment on the day.
I have a question, if I can launch in. You were saying, Chris, that you're kind of isolated in where you live and there's not that many people around you, but sometimes there might be a lot of people around you and you still feel like you're isolated, and that you might want to bring this book to your community or your family or your friends, but like it's even hard to rise to that occasion and to get over that challenge. And how do you even begin that conversation that you want to read this book and you want to read it with your peers? Like, do you have any tips on how to start that conversation?
Well, firstly, what a really great question. And what I love is a phrase I use called the journey approach to change. So in the journey approach to change, you start with a call to adventure. A call to adventure is, here's me, I'm feeling the tug of a motivational impulse. I want to go away and do something, or move somewhere. And so we're looking here at the impulse. I'd love to read this book with other people. But any great adventure, there's always obstacles in the way. It's just the way these stories go, and it's like that in life too. And so here's me, I'd love to, but my desire to bumps into all kinds of obstacles in the way. What will people think of me? I might end up with a situation where I'm out of my depth and I don't know how to deal with it, or I might end up with a group with people I don't get on with. You know, there's all kinds of fears that get in the way. And so I would say that what comes next is what I think of as a preparation stage of change. The preparation stage of change is, I know I want to, but I'm not quite sure how, or I don't feel quite ready. So then in this journey approach to change, what's the journey of becoming more ready? So it might be, for example, going to activehope.info and looking for the link for the Active Hope book groups and doing some background reading. There's some interviews with people who've set up Active Hope book groups. I've got some more resources I'm going to be putting up there soon. And see yourself as training yourself, but then be on the lookout for clues. So clues are asking the question, how would I know if somebody was interested? How would I know if somebody was actually underneath the surface, itching to join an Active Hope book group, but they just didn't know where one was or where one existed? So then you kind of think, well, what's the story? What's the story? And one idea that we talk about in the book is the idea of backcasting. So backcasting is where you kind of imagine what you'd like to happen, and then imagine that it has happened, and then look back and ask yourself, well, how did it happen? What's the story of how this group occurred? And it's kind of like you tell yourself a fairy tale in a way. Well, okay, let's just make up a story. The way this group happened was, and you start thinking about ideas about how it might have happened. I put an advert in the local newspaper. I put a card up in a local health food shop. I wrote mysterious notes to 5 people, but I didn't say who it was from. I kind of made it like this is a mysterious invitation, you know, and I sent it through the post, but I gave them a way of replying. It might be a PO box, or if you're interested, phone this number or something like that. But what you need is you need to put something out, and you need it easy for people to come back to you. And you also need to be prepared for frustration. I mentioned at the beginning, frustration tolerance is one of the important skills of being a great changer, you know, or forming an active hope group. But I think also I'd say the first step is to find a co-conspirator. A co-conspirator is one other person who shares it, shares the idea. And so you'll be on the lookout. Who might be someone else I can talk about this with? The process of setting up a group is itself an adventure.
Yeah.
And don't be put off if there's obstacles in the way. But if you think, okay, you know, I go to the cinema to watch adventures, I like them when they're on TV, and the ones in real life, you know, I say the best stories are the ones that jump out the page and recruit you into the story.
Mhm.
And I love, there's a story, Ecotopia, about creation of a ecological society, but there's lots and lots of those kinds of stories. But in a way, what we're doing with Active Hope is we're looking at the story of the Great Turning. The story of the Great Turning is a larger adventure that is recruiting for people to take part, and this is one way to take part. I'm
Yeah.
just going to read through something that Paul's written here. In fact, what I think I might do is I might just read it out, if that's okay, Paul. So Paul, you've said, I've scanned the whole book and am halfway through close reading. I feel we need to be careful to accept its merits, but not treat it as a holy grail. 7 years on, we're in a more perilous situation. Extinction Rebellion is part funded by folk who are lucky to drive out of the wildfire in California with children last season. The needs are now more pressing. I believe now in non-violent direct action and actively support Extinction Rebellion. Your thoughts? Yes, totally agree. And it's interesting, people within Extinction Rebellion, many have said that they say that the work that reconnects is very much within the DNA of the movement. It's about what supports our capacity, intention and enthusiasm to play our parts. And we talk about the Great Turning as having 3 main dimensions. So one is holding actions, where we take part in actions to protect what's left, to protect the biological basis of life, the systems that sustain and support us, and the communities that we value as well, the social fabric, which is also unraveling. And that includes direct action, and it includes campaigning, and it includes court actions, and it includes writing articles that increase awareness. There's so many different ways. And I love the idea of broadening the definition of activism to see, well, that's one side of activism, but another side of the activism is building the positive structures of a life-affirming society, and that includes things like permaculture. It includes things like looking at our patterns of communication. It includes looking at how we approach healthcare and education and transport and housing, so that as the old collapses, there are green shoots of some kind of ways of living and organizing ourselves that can sustain us in the longer term in a sustainable way. And that's also a really important part of the Great Turning. What we look at as a 3rd dimension is, and it's not that one is more or less important than the other, they all feed each other, is the idea of consciousness change. Consciousness change is change in the way we see ourselves, the way we think about who we are or what we are. And for me, I think of it as, I use the phrase the Gaia shift. The Gaia shift is moving from myself as just a separate individual to seeing myself as part of life on Earth. And that's very much the shift that we write about in Active Hope. That rather than see ourselves as separate, we see ourselves as connected, as part of rather than apart from. And what I found is that when I come from that place, when I tap into, I think of it as the Gaia stream, is the like the deeper flow of consciousness that connect us all, just in the way when you look at a forest, there's individual trees, but their root system connects them all, and there's all these mycorrhiza, kind of fungal connections between the trees, that in a way, if we find our unitive field, our deeper belonging, that is what helps us come from a different place. So in terms of what supports nonviolent direct action, what supports us to have the conviction to lie on a road, to be arrested, is recognizing that there's something so much more deeply important than how we're getting on with our career. And I remember when I was a medical student years ago, very involved in direct action, arrested in the city of London in what was called Stop the City, very much like Extinction Rebellion now. There's a long tradition of non-violent direct action, very important part of this. And also, it's not the only part. And this thing about what's the Holy Grail, I think there's no one thing which is the one thing we must all do. More what supports us to find our thing, our part in this larger story. And it's going to be different for everyone. But those are three broad directions which I think are really important. And we might be involved in all three of those.
I just want to jump in very briefly to answer to respond to your answer to my question before. And this might also tie into what Paul was saying. So we were talking about frustration and not being like having to find the right people to read this book with and the right people to have these conversations with. And there lots of people have experienced trying to have conversations with your family about this and getting frustrated and angry and upset. And I've been there, but finding the people who relate to you and who are ready to have these conversations is really nourishing, and it really builds up your like sort of resistance and really equips you with making the decisions on what actions am I ready to take. And you can then go back and have the conversations with your family because you're more prepared, because you know that there are other people out there struggling and seeing these things the way that you're seeing them, and you don't feel like you're the one going crazy. And so I just wanted to kind of tie in to what you were saying, and also to Paul, that by connecting with people first of all and going through this process of dealing with how you're responding to things on a psychological and emotional level allows people to kind of reflect and think about, do I want to take nonviolent direct action? Is there something else that I can do? Because not everybody can take nonviolent direct action. But we, of course, there are millions of us, billions of us on this planet, and we can all do different things. And acknowledging that we're all doing different things is really, really important.
Yes, love what you're saying, Claudia. And I think that, you know, one term is non-violent direct action, another term is courageous action.
Yeah.
And we're all called to courageous action in different ways. And the courageous action might just be asking a member of your family how they feel about what's happening in the world. And if that's been a taboo topic of conversation, just raising it as a question. And there's a lovely thing about not so much being an inspirational speaker, but being an inspirational listener. Just asking the question and being a willing pair of ears, but also really pick up on what you're saying, Claudia, that actually there are some people who aren't necessarily the right people to be in a group with, and that you want to build trust and mutual support, and that you want to recruit people who you find supportive and you build some sense of trust with. I think that conflict and difference will emerge in any group. It's just a normal part of group process. But I would seek out people who have a common basis of agreement, at least as your starting point. An agreement like saying, you know, if you want to read a book saying how to face the mess we're in, it helps if people agree that we are in a mess.
Yeah, and that's one of the challenges. One of the major things that I'm really concerned about is that people are kind of sleepwalking through this mass extinction, climate breakdown, and we're just not stopping to notice. And I'm not talking about people who are actively engaged in Friends of the Earth or members and supporters, but I just mean the more wider general public maybe. And they include people in my wider family as well. Not sleepwalking through it because they want to, but just because they haven't got the ability to just wake up and have a look and look and see the kind of mess and the crisis that we're kind of walking ourselves into, collectively walking off the edge of a cliff. And one of the things we say often, people come to us in Friends of the Earth, this is really distressing, which it is. What can I do? What can I do about it? And often the media frames response to climate change, climate breakdown, and ecological devastation. The media often frames that as it's an individual's fault and an individual must respond by taking an individual action, like responding to climate or plastic pollution. We will just take our keep cups and say no to plastic, and there will be, and that's kind of how the debate is often framed, and that is very frustrating. And so one of the things we often say to people is the best thing that you can do as an individual is to not be an individual. And that is to join a group, whatever that group may be. To form a group or join a group can be a powerful way to help you find how you take find what that means to you and what it is that you can contribute. And that's, I think, a powerful way of looking at things, I think. I don't know. Will we move to, did Dervla ask your question?
Sorry, it wasn't so much a question as wanting to kind of join into the conversation. And I mean, it's always great to hear you, Chris. Thank you very much. It's a reaffirmative of the whole kind of work. The thing, in terms of engaging in activism, I think that having been involved in the work that reconnects for a long time, it's more important to connect first before you take action. So one of the big errors that people make and that leads to burnout is to act from an individual basis rather than kind of through the recognition of what Chris is talking about, that when you look at, like, you know, a forest, all the trees are in communication with each other. And in the same way, one of the understandings that underlies this way of working is the concept of the ecosystem itself. Everybody is experiencing something because we are part of this earth, and whether or not they're in a place where they're ready to acknowledge that or to own it, it doesn't stop them being in distress about it. So there's something around kind of going, it's not necessarily anything that we need to say. It's the thing that Chris is talking about, be a listener first. Because, I mean, when I was involved in the Tara Roads campaign, one of the things that they had in their leaflet is, like, you don't need to come to the camp, you don't need to do anything. They had a little list, and the first thing on the list was talk to people. And the funny thing is that the people that are not so passionately engaged and active, like, and on the front line of kind of activism, are actually in a better position to have that gentle conversation. What do you think about this? Or have you ever thought of, I mean, what's your take on this? Or does it matter? I mean, one of the things that happened to me today, which absolutely blew me away, was I was with somebody in a cafe who, in my perception, had no awareness of this stuff at all. I mean, I really would never have imagined in a million years. And there was a wasp appeared, and what did they say? Oh, you do realize that they're like at risk of extinction, you know, just even the wasp. And it blew me away. So there's a kind of thing around, don't underestimate how much people are in contact with this. We're connected whether we recognize it or not, I guess, is what I wanted to say. And that the less emphatic we can be in opening up that conversation with people, the more likely we are to find a way of them actually reconnecting with their feelings about it. And it's something about, we are all in this together, and we're engaged. Those of us who are most engaged in it need to recognize that there is that everybody's in touch with it, I guess, is the thing that I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
So will we bring in Robbie, if you wouldn't mind sharing? So you have just started an Active Hope reading group or book group. How's that going for you?
Yeah, the context is Common Ground Northern Ireland, and we have various ideas on theme of our 5 hours, which are retreat, reconnect, recovery, wild, and reconcile. So, Chris, I did your online series last autumn, and left that with the idea that some way I would get that work happening here at Common Ground. Came home last Tuesday night, put a picture of the book on Facebook and said I'm calling in anybody who's interested in this just to kind of suck it and see. And by the morning I had, the formation of 2 groups. So there were a group of people who were in Northern Ireland who are willing to travel to the farm. And then other people who said, well, I really want to do this, but why can't you do it online? And I said, no, it has to be face-to-face. And then when it got to kind of 6, 7, 8 of those people, I thought, well, shit, I'm going to do two groups. So I'm just sitting here having paused and taken that in. And then I have loads of kind of strategic questions, like seems to be a group 8 members in each. How often should we meet? I had a little chat with Dervla there, and I agree with her. How do you stimulate it out of just being a head process into more of the experiential? So I'm sitting with that. That's easy when we're here on the farm. We have an idyllic location in which to go out into nature, do some practices, and come back in. The online group will be, it'll be more of a challenge to get people into the experiential and out of just reading. So that's where I'm at. It's brand new. I feel a little bit challenged, and I think I'm going to adopt more of a kind of a catalyst approach. That I'm not the kind of I've started it. I'm the catalyst, but it'll be kind of a peer process, and look to others to step up and say, well, I can do this, and what about this? And so that it's all fresh and new. That's where I'm at. I think I was kind of shocked, really. I mean, one, it is the Facebook bubble. My bubble is full of people who are switched on, but even so, I didn't anticipate that. It actually has brought out of the woodwork people here in Fermanagh who I didn't think they would step up, but here they are, and I think there's a big shift afoot. So yeah, that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there is a big shift afoot. I'm starting to feel positive and hopeful. As Greta Thunberg says, we have her book here, No One is Too Small to Make a Difference. But another famous quote that she has, I suppose, is that once you act, hope is everywhere. And I am starting to see that more and more. I'm starting to feel a little bit positive. It's important to feel negative and positive. It's important to recognize the negativity, and then and also it's important to feel positive. Otherwise, as Dervla points out, when you're alone with those negative thoughts, it starts to become full of despair, and you burn out very quickly in your activism. So it is important to look after yourself, and look after those around you, and especially if you find those around you who share your concerns and want to act and want to protect the beautiful world that we live in for now and for the future, then that's important. One of the really cool things I find about this book is about how it reframes stories. And we're reading a book club, but this one, it reframes stories as about imagining what is possible and imagining the future that you want, which is important because sometimes environmentalists, we always are trying to protect something from devastation, and reframing the story about imagining the future that you want as a positive all around us is an interesting way, I think, of looking at things, and it's something that I'm taking away from this. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Anyone else have more questions, or do you want to step in?
Yeah, will we open it up if anyone would like to comment or say anything or ask any questions?
Yeah, no, I just I'm doing a course in DCU. It's a climate change policy, and it's 4 hours a week. And by the end of the 4 hours, we're all we're quite deflated and quite exhausted. But I think there's 13 of us in the class, and it's just we've all bonded quite well because we're getting the message that we're getting after every class is like it's quite it says how difficult a wicked problem or something is called. It's not like fixing, like there was a solution for fixing the hole in the ozone layer, which it isn't quite fixed. It's not perfect, but they found a technical solution, and it's going to be fixed probably by the end of the century. But this other problem, just finding well, there is no one solution, and it just seems like such a monumental problem for everybody. But the fact that there's this brand new course that we're doing, and there's 13 of us, it's quite a new experience. Like, I'd be in my late 40s, and I've never been in a class where people are so passionate about what they're there trying to study. But we've gone to all the protests, and yeah, it's just difficult. But like, one thing that we have learned is that it's very hard to bring you're not going to get everybody on board, and just try to work on the people that are on board, and the skeptics, you're never going to really bring them along, and just work with the positive people that you have, kind of thing. And yeah, forming groups is key, I think. And I was at one of the talks where they had 4 of the teenagers talking. I think it was the one in the stables, and it was interesting listening to them talking how worried they were and how articulate they were, I think.
Yeah, the teenagers are so inspiring, and sometimes it's like using simple language. Not that all teenagers use language, I use simple language as well, but like, I think simplifying it to like, okay, there's a problem, how are we responding, how are we feeling, and coming together and working it out, and they're just like, okay, we need to do this. And I think we need a little bit of that, because it can get very complicated and overwhelming.
A friend of mine who teaches climate science has found this work so helpful, and that it's not making people hopeful. It's more about saying, when we do feel exhausted, when we do feel despairing or deflated, what helps us deal with that? And one thing I was really struck by, Sinead, is that you said you felt bonded as a group facing this together. That's part of it. There's a lovely saying, I can't, we can, in recovery groups. And it's not so much, I can't fix this, but it's more like, I can't bear this, but maybe we can bear it together, or we look at what helps us bear it, what helps us be with it, not necessarily feeling hopeful. But this is really where the distinction with active hope, it's not something you have, it's something you do. And even if you feel hopeless, you can still do active hope. You can still take steps in the direction you hope for. And we don't know what will happen if we were to all start, even if we felt completely despairing, felt, well, okay, I know what I want to be part of. I want to be part of the recovery of our world. I want to be part of supporting life, playing my part for the flourishing of life. Then I'll be a small force in that way. And we just don't know what can happen if we really get serious about supporting our intention, our capacity, and our enthusiasm to make a difference in the world. I think it's really interesting. But anyway, it's fabulous that you're all here, and really wish you luck with the group you're with and all the groups that you're with. There's Luana, we've just got a little bit of time left, so I'd love to hear what you have to say. Thank you, Sinead.
One thing I wanted to share, because I study theology, so I spend a lot of time in Christian spaces or in religious spaces, and also in activist spaces. The question comes up a lot about how do we reach people, and it tends to be like a source of kind of negative response when we feel like it's frustrating not to be able to reach the people that we need to reach. And I think one of the things that's really helped me commit to people who are already on some level on board is remembering that whether or not, like, I don't have to reach everyone. If I reach one person, they are already connected to all the other people in their lives. And it may not persuade the other people in their lives to change their mind about something, but by incremental exposure to new ideas and to different ideas, already a change has been affected. So I think it's a little bit of like systems thinking, but it's really, it helped me really commit to the people who are already on board, which I think has helped me lose less energy about over who I'm missing and who I'm not able to reach and who I'm not. So it's just it's a very subtle sort of change in perspective about, I'm a Quaker, so I'm kind of aggressively non-conversionist. So just the idea, in a way, like I think we can just let that go and just sort of, put all of our intention and all of our joy in where the energy is flowing freely, and really not lose hope about who we're not reaching.
Yes, we do what we can. I love the saying, aim for progress rather than perfection.
Yes.
And, a friend of mine says, well, I do my best, but my best varies. And we're looking at how we support the best we can do. And totally agree with you, Paul. We need to think differently around what we can do and what needs to be done. It's gone very far, and it's looking at how we find our part, in this. And there's what I think of as the middle bit of change. If the first bit of change is becoming aware, and the third bit of change is doing our action, whatever that is in whatever sphere, the middle bit of change is looking at what goes on between awareness and action. And that's really what this book is about, what supports us to find our enthusiasm, find our inspiration, to dare to believe that we can make a difference, to seek out people to do that with, to not be put off by so much that could stop us. And there's a long tradition of people who've been doing this action for our world. Just seeing the film recently about Nelson Mandela, I think it's really good to have people who inspire us, but also to recognize that now's our turn. We are here to play a part, and it's Active Hope is Active Hope work is looking at what helps us do that. And the groups reading the book together is really just an excuse to come together to have a conversation around, first of all, let's get it off our chest, how we're feeling about this, whatever that is, and it will vary from day to day, whatever, but also then looking at what helps us give our best response. Thank you so much to Kate and to Claudia for hosting us and setting this up. And all that you're doing with developing an Active Hope network in Ireland too.
Thanks, Chris.
You're very welcome. So we've been on the phone or on the Zoom now for over an hour, so we said we would keep it to an hour. So I think it's time for us to wrap it up. What do you think, Claudia?
Yeah, I think so. I just want to thank everyone for joining the call and contributing. I hope that you got something from it. And if you haven't started reading the book, I would really encourage you to read it. And reach out to people. If you want to reach out through Friends of the Earth, we're happy to try and connect you to people in your area if you need people to read the book with. So, and thank you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Great. Hey, lovely to see you again, Devla. Great to see you again, Robbie. And great to meet everyone new again. And Paul, you were at the one a month ago, I think, as well, at the beginning of the month. Nice to see you again. And thank you. Great.
And then just to say, this is part of the Friends of the Earth Book Club series. So we will have another book next month. And we have already picked it, haven't we, Claudia?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's going to be next month.
Okay.
But the next book we're reading is called Resist, and it's like an activist campaign sort of handbook. So I'm really looking forward to reading that.
Yeah.
And we'll be sharing more information about our next events and webinars through our website. And we'll probably be posting the resource here on our website as well.
So we're hoping that everyone's going to read Active Hope, become inspired to be activists, and then next time we're going to give you like the toolkit for seriously
action.
taking it all on. Thanks everyone for joining us, and have a nice evening.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.